For as long as gaming has existed, the player experience and the viewer experience are in the same format, 2D video. But look at VR. All we've made with it is 2D video. So for the first time, the player experience and the viewer experience are in fundamentally different formats. So if you ask me long term, what's going to be the immersive way to create and share content with your community, I think it's going to be...
Welcome to a new episode of XR and AI Spotlight, the show where we give the stage to the founders and makers pushing the boundaries of XR and AI. My name is Gabriele Romagnoli, I'm your host, and I'm here today with Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom is the co-founder and CEO of LIV. He spent 11 years in tech, with 7 of those consisting of founding and running LIV, the world's leading XR capture tool. If you have seen any cool mixed reality footage in a commercial, trailer, streamer, or content creator, it is very likely that was created with LIV. They have recently become the official partner with Meta to bring robust and fully featured mixed reality capture and virtual camera support to Meta Quest. And today, we will discuss the tools that will soon be available to developers and creators to capture XR gameplay.
In end of the summer, we're launching something called Quest Creator Kit, or QCK. And QCK is an SDK for developers that unlocks rich virtual cameras that allow you to grab a selfie stick, third-person camera, a drone camera, and first-person views with smoothing and FOV natively on Quest. It should take a competent developer less than 30 minutes to implement.
Why even bother with creating MR content for your game or app?
2 big value strands here. We're looking at new data with Meta right now, but mixed reality trailers tend to convert better on storefronts. So the simple sell there is use LIV to create your marketing materials and you will simply sell more copies of your game on whatever storefront you're on. The other one is, of course,
what are interesting use cases for MR capture beyond gaming and social media content creation?
So we see about 50 to 100 developers registered on the platform every month. 70% of those tend to be game developers. So the question is, what are the rest of the 30%? And the answer is...
And what the partnership with Meta means for developers and creators, and how the team managed what could have been a much less desirable outcome.
The way less desirable outcome was the truth and the reality for us for almost 6 years, meaning Meta built their own solutions. And I don't know if my approach will be the right approach for everyone. I think the advice that I will give people is...
But before we get into it, I wanted to thank our sponsor Meshy, who made this episode possible. Meshy is a real powerhouse for generating 3D assets with AI. You can start with a simple text or image prompt and get high-quality stylized 3D models in just a minute. One feature I personally love is the ability to create stylized texture for any mesh, with or without UV. And since the release, Meshy's teams keep pushing amazing updates like texture inpainting, ultra-realistic sculpture, and the ability to rig and animate your character. To try it out, go to meshy.ai and start the 7 days trial to access all these incredible features. And now it's time to roll the title and welcome Dr. Doom under the spotlight. It's a pleasure to have you.
Good to be here.
Indeed, look, and I want to dive right into it. I consider to some extent myself a bit of a content creator, and exploring how we can tell story and how products, experiences can actually work, how it feels to be there. And I've experimented with LIV, and yet we are still not there where the process is streamlined as much, at least as I would. So the first question I want to ask is, why is this actually taking so long to have an easy to use solution to kind of like record third-person footage of XR gameplay?
Totally. So it kind of depends on how we want to define third-person footage. There is third-person footage with a physical external camera, and then there is virtual cameras that you can position in your app experience. Whenever you're using an external camera, you typically need to use a PC. You need additional firepower to run that experience. And so by default, it becomes more complicated because you need to use additional software to do it. In our case, of course, the solution is a 2-part solution. There's the LIV app, which you can get on Steam for free, which you launch the application with. And then there's the LIV SDK, which app developers and game developers integrate into their apps to enable the capabilities in the first place. And that itself brings some complexity with it. We will probably talk about this in a second. There is a solution coming up by the end of this summer, that will be a lot leaner and cleaner for the end user, where effectively you can pull out a virtual camera inside any application, just like in the real world today. You can pull out your phone and just take a picture, record a video. You'll be doing the exact same thing inside your favorite apps in VR, and hopefully soon also AR.
So this is, let's start with that, right? So you mentioned that right now, if you want to do something like this, what you would need to do is fire up a PC, have a camera connected to that PC, be on DSLR or any other camera, GoPro, there could be different kind of cameras that go with that. And then you could record footage. Now, also for people that doesn't know, it might not be familiar with it, can then also a standalone Quest app take advantage of this, or does it need to be a PC VR version of that app in order to record the mixed reality?
Today, if you want to do mixed reality, meaning the composite of a real human into the scene, you need a PC. And that is true also with the Meta partnership that we announced. So fundamentally, the solution there is you have a whole bunch of developers building Quest-based applications, and they want to film high-quality trailer and marketing collateral for their game, whether it's for the storefront or for their social media. And in that sense, you will need the power of a PC to record 4K resolution, for example, at the quality that you might want for a trailer. The complexity comes from the fact that indeed you're using a physical camera, which means you have to do some steps to calibrate that camera. The way we do it, by the way, I'll demonstrate with my hands here. You would take your controller in the calibration process inside LIV, and you would go up to the camera and click once, and that tells us where the camera position is. And then you would go back into one of the corners and click, and then the bottom right corner and click, and that gives us the FOV of the camera. And in the background, what we do is we spawn a virtual camera in that position with those camera intrinsics, so that when you then grab the cup in the game or the sword aligns appropriately to your hand, so that it indeed looks like you're holding the object you're holding in the game. So in many ways, you can think of it as a sandwich. We take a bunch of layers. We have the game foreground, we have the camera layer, the game background, and two transparency layers in between. And then you take that sandwich and we do what we call a composite. You smush them together. And that's how you technically create mixed reality footage. There's some steps in between you can dig in, but fundamentally that's it.
And so these also mean that even if you have an app running exclusively on Quest, this could still be done if that specific Quest standalone app supports it, but then you will still need the external computer with the external camera to record at least what we were calling some actual composited mixed reality footage. So maybe
on that note, so what developers typically do is they'll build a PC version of their Quest app, which is a couple of configurations inside their build engine, and then they generate a PC app just so that we can do the captures themselves.
Okay, understood. This opens up another whole series of questions regarding who is using and who will be the people that are targeted, and we are going there. But before that, I think maybe we went straight into the app and the solution and the product in a way. But there is another fundamental question here that is like, how can we record XR gameplay? Because that is another important thing. We started immediately assuming that it's about having a green screen maybe and having someone into that space. But I mean, actually, there are people doing all this with just avatars, right? There is no reality, right? There is another dimension that is getting more and more popular, being full mixed reality capture, right? Where it's another layer. So as you, I think, one of the biggest experts here, without a doubt, about all this, can you unpack this for people? Like, when is more convenient to build to capture gameplay in one way other than another?
Yeah, I think a lot of this will come down to what goals you have and what outcomes you're looking for. Gabriele, what you might not know is when we started in 2016, one of the first things we did was host our own show on Twitch, where we would play games. In fact, the initial idea was, what might competitive gaming look like in VR? In VR, of course, your input method is motion controllers. And our assumption was that if input in VR and AR equals motion, then if you're really good at games, chances are you're moving your body in really interesting ways. And we wanted to show that human nuance in the recording. That was sort of the spawning point of MR. Having said that, when we streamed, we would often stream. My name, Dr. Doom, comes from competitive gaming. And so we would stream games that we play competitively. And we streamed an early version of our avatar system because if you don't involve physical cameras, you're then only using virtual cameras. And that allows you to film content in ways that are really good for gameplay sharing, for example. So we would play competitive shooters. For competitive shooters, you want a smooth first-person view with a wider FOV. You want to be able to take out a virtual camera and film your avatar interacting with the world. And then you have the other side of the spectrum, which is typically you have a game, you want to market it to a community of buyers who haven't heard of your game before. They may not have even tried VR before. And mixed reality capture ends up being a really effective tool to sort of sell the experience to someone who may have never tried it before, contextualizing the human in the scene and what they're doing. So a long answer to your question, which is, it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you're a competitive gamer, chances are you're not using mixed reality capture. If you are someone who's trying to build a big TikTok following, but you're playing fundamentally static games where your body isn't really locomoting, you're just moving, mixed reality tends to be a really good solution for that. So you can slice it in any shape or form you want. With LIV today, you can do the full range. You can do everything from first-person capture to virtual cameras to adding your own avatar, all the way up to mixed reality capture. And now with the Meta partnership, mixed reality capture. So capturing a human in the physical space.
Tell me about that, because I think that is one of the very interesting, especially now, how much we are trying. I mean, the industry seems to be moving into that direction, right? So there is more requests, more demand for that mixed reality that eventually will evolve into, let's say, augmented reality when we will have the glasses, but we will still need a way to record and tell stories about what is happening. So can you guide me into that last part, that mixed reality capture of a mixed reality game? Were there specific challenges that made it different from others' way of capturing a gameplay?
Yes, the big fundamental difference is when you're doing mixed reality capture, we actually internally call it third-person pass-through mixed reality capture. It's just a bit of a mouthful, so we don't use that externally. The big difference is you're not using a green screen. So the question then becomes, how do you segment the human, like myself on the screen right now, from the background? And that's where the complexity comes in with MRC, mixed reality capture, which is you need some way to segment the human. And today you don't do that in real time. So to capture mixed reality capture today, you would record just like you would with LIV normally, but you don't see a preview because you can't have a preview without the segmented human. So you have to do all of that compositing in post. What happens is you get your layers, your foreground, your background, your alpha, and your camera feed. And then in a post-editing software like pick DaVinci Resolve, you would then rotoscope or cut out the human as a separate layer before you do the composite. So it becomes more complex and more time-consuming, which is fundamentally today why it's mostly a developer solution so that they can work with our trailer production studio and other trailer production studios to film high-quality trailers for their apps.
Yeah, because you mentioned another important thing, right? So what is really needed? So there is a level of, let's say, trailer level production for a studio, right? I imagine, for example, Resolution Game have been putting out some incredible trailer, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Being one among many. So, do you ever think of adjusting or to a less needy audience, like me, for example, where I might not need that fully fleshed out or crisp edges for digital content or for humans? Like, how do you approach this when you want to get more people beyond just the professional studios trying to record their gameplay?
So for 2025 and beyond, with Meta, the goal is to improve that tooling for creators. And the big unlock there is a real-time segmentation model for the human, so that you can do the capture without having to do any post-editing, which makes it really complicated for most people. What you also might not know is in 2020, I believe it was, we built a mobile application because, of course, most people have a phone in their pocket, and there are segmentation models that run on phones. What we found when we released it, even though it was really highly anticipated, is that the combination of what at the time was the Quest 1 and Quest 2 and the mobile phone, even though the setup was dead simple, it was so cool. You take your phone, you take your control, and you press, and that was it. The outcome, the output rather, the quality of the content was so low that in the marketplace of content on social media, it just really had a hard time standing out. And so while the tech was great and the solution worked well, the video quality wasn't. And that became its death knell. Effectively, what we saw was after about 60 days, we had less than 1% retention. And when we surveyed people, what we found was, hey, this is a really cool app and it's really easy to use, but the video quality just isn't good enough and no one is watching my videos. That's of course changing as devices get better and better, which is why when I say look to 2025 and beyond, we have some plans that I can't quite divulge yet. I will share some other cool stuff though today, I promise, but we're working on it.
So stay tuned, we are waiting for that. And maybe while I'm probing to get more cool stuff out, the other question is, will we always need a PC in order to record this footage? What are the other options that might not rely on a powerful PC and a setup that can be for some pretty, let's say, daunting?
Yeah, so just to differentiate, there's mixed reality capture with a physical camera and virtual cameras. For mixed reality capture, you're going to need a PC for the foreseeable future. Primarily also because the people who use it tend to be studios and high-end creators like Ellis Toast and Nacy, who technically have their own studio in their house.
Yeah.
They're not really average creators. In end of the summer, we're launching something called Quest Creator Kit, or QCK, Quick for short. And QCK is an SDK for developers that unlocks rich virtual cameras that allow you to grab a selfie stick, third-person camera, a drone camera, and first-person views with smoothing and FOV natively on Quest. So you implement it into your app, and now every single one of your players can pull out the QCK camera at any given time and film any of those modalities without the need of a PC or a companion app, meaning it will natively live in the game. So in ShapesXR case, every ShapesXR user will pull out the QCK camera to film that kind of footage that I just spoke.
Nice. So now the point is that this is require, let's say, some amount of work from the developer to, let's say, check that mark, right, and make this option possible. How do you do it? How hard is it for teams to implement this?
I have to be really careful not to oversell here. So what I usually tell developers, I think is the honest answer, is it should take a competent developer less than 30 minutes to implement. Fundamentally, what you do is you drag and drop it into your project, you assign the player pawn to it, and you choose what you don't want to render in the output. This is really important for mixed reality. You might not want certain UI to render. So it's really straightforward. There's an asterisk here, and the asterisk is if for some reason in your app you already have a camera system, you need to make sure that they can play well with each other. And that can require a bit of forth and back, and we're always happy to help. We're available constantly. So I would say an hour or less, unless you're doing some black magic fuckery. And if you're doing that, then please talk to us and we'll help you.
Right. So one thing, let's take the technology out for a second, right? So what do you think can be the actual value for developers to do it? Like, how do you see this capability adding value to them and to their users? Because, of course, it is still half an hour, 1 hour. But it's not just that, right? It's also like, do we want people to do it? What do we expect them to do with it? How are they going to find out that there is this new tool in the app, for example? So how can you convince as many teams as possible, hopefully some that are listening right now, to actually go in and then start implementing this?
Two big value strands here. The first one is, as a developer, you can make high quality videos for your trailers, for your social media, yada, yada. We spoke about that. I think that value proposition is pretty obvious. There is some early indication, and we had some data about this in 2020. I won't regurgitate the numbers because it's so long ago that it might have changed, and we're looking at new data with Meta right now. But mixed reality trailers tend to convert better on storefronts. So the simple sell there is use LIV to create your marketing materials, and you will simply sell more copies of your game on whatever storefront you're on. That's one strand, pretty obvious strand. The other one is, of course, you have a community of players. of which a subset are content creators. And the question you should ask yourself is, do I want to empower my content creators with great tooling so that they do the one thing that I want them to do, which is to create content of my game and put it on their social media and share it with their community? And that's where the long tail value comes from. You can get some of the biggest creators in VR today to create fun, exciting content in your app, put it on their TikTok, put it on the Horizon feed, put it on their YouTube, and drive eyeballs to your game.
Of course. And so we were discussing indeed about this technical aspect, and you of course threw several time creators in, right? So for a second, I want to take a let's say a side path. How have you seen content creators using Live in creative ways that is maybe not just playing the game in mixed reality, but using it to engage with their audience? Or maybe, for example, what recommendation would you have to anybody that is approaching telling story or capturing this gameplay for immersive experiences?
How much time do you have? It's a lot.
We do have time limit, but I think that if you condense it, I'm pretty sure people will have a lot to learn.
Yeah, so you can think of Live as a complete solution for streaming and engaging with your community. So stream alerts, stream chat, stream utilities. So fundamentally, people either use it to inject their own avatar into your game so they can represent themselves like they typically do online. If you're a VTuber and you have an avatar that is yours, that everyone in the world knows you as, with Live, you can now be that avatar inside your favorite game. That's one really big strand that people use it for. Surprisingly, some people use Live just for the avatar feature so that they can overlay themselves playing regular games. So there's that use case too, which is completely out of VR. They're just using VR for the puppeteering, effectively.
Right.
Then you've got people like myself who are competitive gamers, and they want to record their highlight moments. And they want to do so in a way that isn't shaky and low FOV and nauseating to watch. That's a really big use case too. And then on the far end of the spectrum, we've got the Ellis Toasts and the Nacies of the world who have a nice green screen studio in their home, and they have millions of followers on TikTok that they share content with, and that could be content in any of the hundreds of games and applications that we support. So it's one of these unfortunate answers. It depends on who the user is and what their goals are, but we think of it as empowering creators with rich tooling, regardless of what app they're in, what headset they're on, or what experience they're trying to create. And it's then completely up to you, the creator.
I wanted to have a quick break to remind you that if you like this conversation, you should check all past episodes at xraispotlight.com. Also, if you don't want to miss anything, remember to subscribe to the XR AI Spotlight newsletter, and you will immediately get an updated list with over 200 mixed reality apps you can filter from various fields, weekly in-depth interviews, and one product spotlight personally tested by me right in your mailbox every week. And now let's get back to the show. So regarding types, right, you mentioned indeed content creators being one, the studios that need to, for example, produce the trailer. Are there other ways in which you have seen people using it that maybe is not necessarily so straightforward? You would say, okay, people, for example, use it out interestingly to play standard games, but they use their avatar system to record their own avatar. That's an interesting one. Are there, for example, other cases that maybe is far from entertainment, for example, or streaming or content creation? What else?
So we see about 50 to 100 developers register on the platform every month. 70% of those tend to be game developers. So the question is, what are the rest of the 30%? And the answer is hobbyists, universities and high schools, and commercial developers. So architectural visualization firms, police training virtual simulations, space agencies. And the question is, what are they using it for? And the answer is, you're building some simulation or some solution that uses VR, and you need a way to sell that experience either to your customers or upwards within the organization. You're Gabriele, you're a VP at some company, you need approval for this project. It's in VR and nobody above you understands VR. How do you
Or
sell
will
it?
ever wear a headset, or will
Or
ever
will
wear
ever,
a headset.
more likely than not, that's true, right? And so you need some way to contextualize what you've built, either for external sales and communication or for internal championing. And we see a ton of that as well.
Interesting. So the other questions that I had is also a bit different, and that is, how do you envision immersive gameplay to be experienced or consumed?
That's the question. Okay. There's a lot to say here. So you may have, I know for a fact that you've played with an early prototype of ours.
Me,
And
no, I
you know
never,
what?
I never play with prototypes. No.
So for the last 7 years, we've been on a mission to empower creators to create and share their favorite moments with their friends, family, and fans. That's always been our mission. And for the last 7 years, we've done so through 2D video. I'm going to give you one analogy. It'll be a quick one. I promise it'll be worth it. Today, if you're playing a game like Assassin's Creed on a Xbox or a PC, you're playing a 3D game built in a 3D engine, but you're playing the game on a flat monitor of some kind. And then if you record a video and put it on YouTube and I watch your video, I'm watching a 3D game built in a 3D engine, but I'm watching it on some sort of a flat monitor. So for as long as gaming has existed, the player experience and the viewer experience are in the same format, 2D video. But look at VR. For the last 7 years, VR has been, you put the headset on and you're inside the game. You're in sixth off. You're fully immersed. And yet, for the last 7 years, all we've made with it is 2D video. So for the first time, the player experience and the viewer experience are in fundamentally different formats. So if you ask me long term, what's going to be the immersive way to create and share content with your community, I think it's going to be volumetric video. I think it's going to be immersive video, a format that gives you the same sense of immersion and presence that you have when you play, only when you watch a video or participate in a stream. That's what we're trying to do with Project Spatial. That's why you've played with a really, really early version of it. You've seen all of the constraints, of course, so far, but this is just notches on a timeline that we're slowly inching towards. And we're hoping to have a public beta for this sometime mid-2025 with a whole bunch of rendering improvements on the quality, because I know that's one of the main concerns.
I mean, and the point is indeed like the technical capture of the volume around the players, right? Because it looks like you had a sort of like a LiDAR camera in a way positioned in the gameplay, and then you would actually capture that kind of thing and re-experiencing this sort of bubble where this volume exists, right? Like as a high level, as a non-technical, that's what I've thought is happening. Now, where is this going? Like, would you be able to record the whole environment? Like, what, it is very challenging, but is that what you are aiming for? Is that what you see going? Like, how does the progression of that capturing goes?
I think the dream for me as a fellow nerd is the following. I watch Twitch every day. It's my favorite mode of entertainment. I would love to go stand right next to my favorite creator when they're playing. And VR lets you do that. With enough time, VR will let us do that. What you've seen so far is an early version of it. So fundamentally, what we want to do there is we want to bring creators and their fans closer together. And by closer together, we're using what makes VR really special, which is the sense of presence. So making it immersive, making it full of that magic that is the presence. Now, there's a whole bunch of technology steps in between. I'm sure you followed, and I know you have, so I'm not even making an assumption here. I know you've been quite interested in neural radiance fields and Gaussian splats. We are, of course, too. Our constraint is we want to make sure we do video from the get-go and not stick with static images. And the AI space right now is strictly limited to static images and some deformation over time solutions where it looks like video, but it's barely video. And for those, you need really high-powered GPUs, which on our case is a no-no because we want to be on standalone devices. So if you think of splats on this side and you think of us here, I think we're both moving like this. And at some point, we will converge to a point where our tech will be either good enough to be high quality, like something like splats, or splats will get performant enough that we're downstream from that and we can just apply it to our rendering models.
So before going, because this AI part is something that, especially when filling gaps, right, about an avatar, how it moves, or a capture, or try to segment things, I think that's where a lot of the magic of AI could help really in a utility fashion. I want to ask one question because when I was thinking about what to ask, while I was writing down, there was one question that came up, and it's like the following: experiences this gameplay feels always like you are a guest in someone else's experience, right? So I am a guest in your gameplay of Gorilla Tag, right? But recording can also feel different. What if you record the player and then you play in my world, so that you're recording, you record it, but then I am in my world, I'm in my game, and then I see you doing stuff. How
You,
is that? Because that's a different way of approaching the experience, right? And I'm pretty sure that, given how you're laughing, that you have been thinking about it way before me.
it's almost like you've been inside our company and listened. So we've done a lot of experimentation even before we announced any of this. Our very first experiment was called holographic calls. The idea is at any given point, I should be able to find Gabriele in my friend list and press open stream. And what I should get is a window inside my VR experience, like a hole through the wall where I can see what you're doing. And so fundamentally, I agree with you. I think volumetric capture and reconstruction technology unlocks a bunch of those kind of solutions. I think the dream, and this is why I think sci-fi gets so many things right. I think the dream is to be able to see what your friends are doing and your fans are doing in real time as if you were there. And also ideally at some point, being able to simply join them. Why not? If there's a window right there, there is technically nothing stopping us from making it really easy to jump from one experience to the other. So we've done a whole bunch of experimentation there. It's still, of course, really early days. This is a long-running greenfield technology thread that we've been investing in for over 2 years. We have a published patent on our capture and reconstruction as well. So we have a lot of plans here, but I can't say too much because if I overpromise here, I think the shape of this will change so much over the next couple of months and years that I don't want to have to go back on this podcast and say that I was wrong.
Okay, well, happy to have you again whenever something changes. That's for sure. So going back to what we were promising, the AI capabilities, right? We have mentioned for sure the splat, so this 3D reconstruction from a video. There is, of course, segmenting being another important thing, especially when you have the capture and the mixed reality part. I've been thinking also about, for example, how a Meta is positioning their generative legs, right? That is another way in which an avatar can be improved in a way using AI, let's say. Now, what are ways in which do you envision AI supporting this process of capturing or filling gaps or so on?
I think long term, we're going to see a whole bunch of applications. I can tell you what we've been actively looking at today and how we're using it partly today. So there's some really good AI models for background segmentation, so that you can remove the background without a green screen and without rotoscoping. They're not good enough for trailer productions, but we use them to significantly speed up our production process. So we don't have to rotoscope everything by hand, we just rotoscope the details. That's a huge application already. You mentioned generative legs. 2 hours ago, we were looking at a paper that takes 3 hours of motion data input. It's a very brand new paper, and you train your own model with 3 hours of motion data where you're just playing around and walking around in a space with motion trackers, with controls and headset. And it can allow you to puppeteer an entire avatar, including lower body, almost perfectly. I mean, it's not perfect yet, but it's very, very close and much better than what you've seen from existing solutions already, including the hardest things like strange motions like this and how your knees bend when you go down in a squat. It does all that terrifically. Then he talked about filling gaps and covering up shadows. That's an area where I think we're going to see a ton of benefits, especially the kind of stuff we're doing on Project Spatial. And the constraint there is running it on a mobile chipset, of course. So that's where time will really help us. Let me think if there's anything off the top of my head that we've actively worked on that isn't just kind of like fugazi in the future. I have a sneaky suspicion that with AI, eventually we're going to get into much better encoding and decoding solutions, more efficient encoding and decoding solutions, compression solutions. That's a little bit more kind of vague for us right now, but the pace of exponential growth, I think humans are really bad at internalizing. And so we're not very good at looking at where we are today and then looking 5 years in the future and drawing an exponential graph. Our brains aren't built for that. And this is another one of these areas where I think by saying less, I will just be more right. And so I won't make any big guesses
That's
there.
the safe side.
It's the safe side for sure. I know for a fact that the things I just mentioned are things we're actively looking at, and we're probably going to be implementing them into our apps into the next 6 to 18 months. And that's a pretty big range, I know, but that's kind of the nature of the beast here.
So one question is, I want to go back to that partnership with Meta, right? So I would like to ask you, what is it? What does it actually mean for the developers and for the creators? Can you maybe explain a little?
So up until the Meta partnership, we did not support the presence platform, being hand tracking, pass-through, occlusion, scene understanding, and body tracking. And there's good reasons for it. We don't have a lot of creators, end users, who film that kind of content. Unsurprisingly, of course, Meta does need that for their own marketing purposes, and more importantly, to empower the developers who build apps on their platform with those capabilities. So the bulk of the work was to make sure that A, LIV works on the Oculus runtime. So there's a bunch of engineering work that went into that. And B, that when apps use presence platform, that we can accurately capture and render that so that it's authentically being recreated. So what we do with LIV, for example, we use the hands, the controllers, which are 6-off track controllers, to align objects. But the question is, what happens if you're just using your hands? You don't have a controller anymore. So we need a way to get 6-off positional and rotational data if you're not using controllers. Simple example. Scene understanding. Once you have the room mesh scanned, how can you make sure that the objects are aligned to that room mesh accurately render when you're capturing with LIV? And those are the many checkpoints that we've gone through to make sure that when we serve developers on the MetaQuest platform, that we're serving them holistically. So regardless of what app you're building or how much of the presence platform you're using, you can use LIV to film your content and material.
So on top of that, right, you mentioned hand tracking, you mentioned the mapping of the object in the space. I was wondering about occlusion. So right now there are different types, right? There is the occlusion from the user, but there is also, for example, depth, dynamic occlusion from other objects that I've seen it recently in a couple of examples. I'm not sure it's been implemented actively in games yet. But maybe can you, because occlusion is what makes a lot of stuff believable, right? I think that is occlusion and shadows. Those are two of the things that
I was going to say shadows. I'm glad you added it. It's clear that you've thought about content.
So those are two important things. How does LIV will or does handle it?
Fortunately for us, how that works with LIV is we're sort of agnostic to that, because we've solved for the presence platform as a tech solution on LIV. If the app uses occlusion, we will just render it appropriately. We don't have to do any additional work or think about any magic to make it happen. In that sense, it's handled by the MetaQuest runtime, and we just ingest whatever it gives us and make sure it renders properly. So this is like this or like this. We don't really care. The app will give us the information. But let me tell you about the occlusion that does matter to LIV. The question is, if I am holding a lightsaber, which is my wallet now, and I'm slicing like this, the lightsaber should render in front of me. But what if I do this? It shouldn't be in front of me. And the question is, how do we do that? And it's really simple. We have a headset, and we know the position and rotation of the headset. And what we do is we draw a clipping plane right through the middle of your body. And whatever is between the clipping plane and the camera is the foreground, and whatever is behind the clipping plane is the background. And so I take you back to the sandwich. We have a sandwich, and we can see whether or not something is behind the camera image or in front of the camera image. And that's how we do occlusion on the rendering side today.
Understand. So the other questions, because now we are closing up. I still was curious, like, how do you actually make a partnership with Meta like this happen, right? So what do you do when these huge companies, right, that enters your space and they're trying to do something similar what you have built? How do you manage, and how do you manage to end up in a situation where you actually start working together instead of ending in way less desirable outcome?
The way less desirable outcome was the truth and the reality for us for almost 6 years, meaning Meta built their own solutions. And I don't know if my approach will be the right approach for everyone, so I would just want to disclaim this isn't advice, it's just what we did, and people can internalize it how they will. The way we run business at LIV is we love to be ultra transparent about everything we do. In other words, for the last 6 years, I've had the same contact at Meta, and regardless of whether or not we've worked together, which we did for the Defy Reality initial Quest 1 trailers, we filmed those, or when they were building their own solutions, our approach has always been, hi Meta, this is what we're passionate about, and this is what our mission is, to help creators share their content with their friends, family, and fans. Here's how we're doing it. Would love to do it together. But also, good on you guys for doing it, because more tools is better for creators. And we just kept working on it. And I think the advice that I will give people is, I think people forget that even at a FANG-sized company like Meta, at the end of the day, behind every email is a human. And somehow we've forgotten that when we work with big companies. We have this almost expectation that because they're Meta, they ought to work with us. And they shouldn't build their own solutions. But why not? Their fate is in their own hands. It's their company, just like LIV is our company. And the best thing we knew to do was just to keep going. We knew, and I can say this confidently, we knew that sooner or later they would come to us because we know we're going to do a better job than them. We're 24 people exclusively focused on this. And Meta is focused on many, many, many things. And so the answer is to just keep doing it, show that you're very good at it, work your butt off to work with developers, which is really the end customer here, to make sure that they have the tooling they need. And what effectively ended up happening was everyone was using LIV. And at some point, it stopped making sense for Meta to try and will this thing into existence when there was a robust solution that's been around for years, trusted by developers, and with a good reputation on the industry. So I think that's been terrific for us, of course. It's nice to sit here after 7 years and say that that worked. 7 years is a very long time to stick it out, so I don't necessarily recommend it to everyone. But if you can, and you have a strong belief that indeed this is important, which we did, I think it can work, and certainly it did for us.
I think it is really a great story, and honestly, it doesn't even feel like at all like, okay, that's where we are, it's ended, but this is just the starting point, right? That's the exciting part. So maybe to close this up, when can when will we be able to start recording more footage about games? So when will this SDK be available to people, and people will be able already to use it and start recording gameplay, for example, with this in-game camera, let's say, to start with?
So in-game camera, Quest Creator Kit, QCK for short, comes out August 2024, so end of summer. We have a laundry list of developers who are going to integrate it. It's going to be great. Some of the biggest games that you've heard of will have it in there. So that's very, very soon. If you're a developer and you need camera solutions for your game to empower your players with rich tooling, please reach out. We're always available. Discord, Twitter, you name it. You can find me everywhere. Then you got MRC, mixed reality capture, making it easier for creators. That requires background segmentation. We're hoping to have a solution ready for either Meta Connect or November, depending on how quickly we can roll out our own solution there. And then 2025 is going to be almost exclusively focused on improving tooling for creators. And that's both on the LIV app for PC VR-based creators, for the mixed reality capture side to make the tooling more robust and easier to use for the downstream creators, and to keep adding richer and richer features to Quest Creator Kit. Fundamentally, we want to be everywhere. Every headset, every game, every type of user. And today, I think we're about 80% there.
Awesome. Dr. Doom, this is exciting times. I'm looking forward to get this in my hands. And one last reminder also to folks that are not just focused on gaming, but there are a lot of creative apps, there are a lot of productivity apps that could benefit from some great content being built, because that is also one thing that I think it's missing. It's indeed broad the lack and the need of telling good stories about the product, about the users in them. So games are good, not forget the other, my passion, creativity and productivity apps. So absolutely, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure. Looking forward to have this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for listening in. If you like the show, please leave a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or a thumbs up on YouTube. It really means a lot to me, and it's a great support for the show. Till next time.